In this video, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go over the grand staff and how we go ahead and read the grand staff. Now, what do we mean by the grand staff in the first place? First of all, whenever we talk about those 5 horizontal lines in music, we call that a staff. When we have 2 of them, we call them staves. And it's a really interesting spelling, but the way that we spell that is so S-T-A-V-E-S, staves. But whenever we have specifically a treble clef staff and a bass clef staff, and then what we oftentimes will find is here on the left side, we'll usually have a bar line that comes all the way down to connect them. And then what we'll have is we'll have a brace, something like this, okay? That ends up putting together, and I'm gonna go ahead and skip over this word so that we can still read it. But when we have that bar line and that brace, oftentimes we end up calling that the grand staff. It has those 2 different parts. Now, of course, for us, what a clef shows us, like the treble clef and the bass clef, it shows us where middle C is. So middle C for the bass clef is on what's called a ledger line. So it's above the staff on a ledger line. And then for the treble clef, it's below the staff on a ledger line as well. Now, again, we have on our staff, we have 5 lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then what we have is in between those lines, we have 4 spaces. What's really interesting though is that you can also find notes that sit above or below the staff, again on ledger lines, or sometimes just hanging off. So like whenever we first write middle C, again it's a line note, then we go to D. D, you'll notice, hangs off of the first line. But again, it's not considered necessarily one of the 4 spaces, even though it's technically here a space note. When we're talking about trying to find line notes versus space notes, what I oftentimes use is I use these 2, C and D, as kind of landmarks for myself. And so what I will do is that you start on middle C, and here I'll go ahead and play it. But so let's say that we started on middle C here, okay? If I'm trying to find the line notes, all I do is I go ahead and skip. Now, whenever we're going ahead and skipping, the way that it works is you just skip one of the white keys on the piano, or really what you're thinking is you're skipping letters. So like from C to E is a skip, from E to G is a skip, G to B, B to D, D to F, okay? So when we're going through the lines, it's actually quite interesting, because the way that it goes is that if I started on C and I'm going up a skip, right, from C to E, really what we're seeing here is that, oh, okay, so we're going to E. So that's what we end up having. So E would be the first line. Again, a skip up from middle C. The reason why that makes sense is because the space note in between is a D. If you specifically have seen anything in our music before, whenever it comes to reading the treble clef or the bass clef, is that specifically when we go from a line to a space, that's a step, a distance of a step. And again, so from C to D, right, that would be a generic step. So again, from C to E, that's a skip. If I were to keep going, E to G, so right here on the second line, we would have G. So this would be G, this one's E. Notice how I'm also specifically specifying which line it's on. That's going to be really, really important for you to understand location. G then goes to B, okay, so we end up having B here on the middle line, so that's B. On the third line, or the middle line, then we have skip up from there, would be D. And then we would have up on top an F, right? And then of course those skips keep going into, of course, our ledger lines. Now, whenever it comes to our spaces, our space notes, what you could do is again, you could go from middle C and just go line, space, line, over and over and over again. That works. Then what you would get is steps. You get C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, all the way up. You could also just start from D and again, skip your way up. So starting from D and going, okay, so a skip up from D would be F. Okay, so the first space would be F. Then skip up from F would be A. Skip up from A would be C. Skip up from C would be E. Now I'm going to go ahead and say, so F would be the first space, second space, third space, fourth space. Now, when you're going through, you'll oftentimes hear about these mnemonic devices. Now, a mnemonic device is really a way that we go ahead and memorize certain letters or certain things using kind of like a phrase. So oftentimes with this one, really, FAC, you just spell the name or the word face. EGBDF, oftentimes the most common one that people know is one that specifically goes, every good boy either deserves fudge or more commonly does fine. So that would end up being our mnemonic device. So again, every starts with an E. So first line, G for good, boy for B, does fine. It's a phrase that we use to kind of memorize. But again, what you can do is that so long as you understand your line, especially like middle C, really if you're going by skips, it's easy to find these notes. Now, what's harder is oftentimes the bass clef. Because what you have to do is that you have to not only skip, but you have to get used to skipping to the left. So that means backwards in the alphabet. So if we were to go ahead and do a similar thing though, so again, from middle C, which is a line note, all I have to do is skip down to find the top line, the fifth line, which would be, again, skip from C to A here. So this would be A. And if I skip down again to the fourth line, that would be F. Then we would have D in the middle line, then B, and then G. Okay? So we would have G, B, D, F, A. Now for this one, the mnemonic device, the phrase that we use to kind of memorize it, is good boys do fine always. Again, you could also just remember that, again, these skips, it's not like they change, like the relationship doesn't change. So the way that the bass clef works is it's almost like instead of starting the skips from E, we just start them from G. So again, G, B, D, F, technically the next one would be A, even though it starts on E here, right? So again, G, B, D, F, and then eventually A. Again, that's what we have here. But again, treble clef starts on that E on the first line. Now, we, again, can do the same thing starting on B in order to get all of our space notes, right? So if I started on B, again, the B below middle C, we would have on the fourth space this note, which is a skip down from G, would be, or sorry, a skip down from B, which would be a G. Then we would have a skip down from G, that would be E. Skip down from E, C. Skip down from C, you get A. Now, you'll notice that, again, and one of the things you always have to be very, very careful about is that there are certain times where you'll have multiple letters, right? So like here on the top line, we have an A. Here on the bottom space, we also have an A, right? But again, based on where they are on the staff not only tells you the letter, but it also shows you location. So that A up there is right below middle C. So that's this one right here. If this is middle C, this is the A that we're dealing with. The bottom space is down here. So you have to be really, really careful with that distinction. Now, underneath that, we specifically have a set of 2 lines for practicing identifying notes. We're going to go ahead and work on a couple of these. Now, for us, again, what we want to do is when we first start trying to identify notes is just practice working on, okay, do we have a line note? Do we have a space note? That's where we have to start first. So like, for example, here we have a line note to start, and we have specifically the second line. So this is line number 2. So really what you want to do is that when you're first starting is that, let's say that we start on line number 2, we specifically would end up having like C, again, is a line note. So again, C, up a skip, this would be E, up another skip, that would be G, right? You could also go and think, you know, this is line C, so this right here in this space would be D, then E, then F, and then G. But oftentimes that just takes a lot of time, and eventually we want to get to a point where we can get to these notes very quick. So this right here, though, this letter is G. Now you could always start from your G and then you could go up. So one kind of cool trick is that, so if I start on G, I know what this line is, that's B. This next line would be D. And then when I go from a line to a space, that's a step. So this would actually end up being E. So that's a fun little trick that you could do. You could also just start from the D space and go D, F, A, C, E, right? And then here, of course, we have D, which is one of our landmark notes. But I would go ahead and try and complete the rest of the ones in this exercise. If you wanted to go ahead and pause here in the video, just so that you could try and figure out these ones, I would give that a shot. And then what we'll do is we'll take a look at the bass clef. Now, the bass clef specifically starts with 3 space notes. So we're going to go ahead and do maybe the first 2 space notes and then this line note. With the space notes, again, you have a couple of options. So you could actually just go from the lines like C and then go A, then F, then D, then B, and then just go a step down. Or you could start on this space, which is B, then you go down to G, E, C. This one would be A. Now, if you find that that's very, very fast, again, you can just also go to your piano, right? So let's say this is middle C. Again, the top, that space that sits at the top is B, then you skip down. Skip to G, skip, and then skip one more. And that gets you to the A. So again, this space right next to it is going to be the letter B. So we have B right here. And then we're going to go ahead and skip this one for a second. But this one right here, we have a line note. So again, the note that we want to use as our reference point is middle C. So that's a line note. So you just skip down, and then skip down again. So what you do is starting on C, you skip down to A would be the top line, then F, and then this would be D. Okay, that's D. So that's just something to keep in mind, right? You could also, if you wanted to, like if you knew that this was A, you could just go, oh, okay, so really that's just a skip up to the space and then up a step, right? So there are a variety of ways that you can go about kind of trying to figure out the notes. But again, always just remember that specifically when we go from line to line or space to space, when they're the same, when we say the same type of note, we're going to be going by skips. If you wanted to alternate between line and space, you're going to end up going steps. And of course, all you really need to know is middle C. If you know middle C, you can figure out the rest of everything. But that's just something to keep in mind, right? And then always be careful. Like if we're going from C and we're going up the treble clef, you're going to be thinking to the right, so up the alphabet. Oftentimes the harder one, which is the bass clef, we're going to be going down to the left, which of course is going to be backwards in the alphabet. But this has specifically been a video on reading the grand staff.